Welcome back to M&M English Academy podcast, where we don't just teach English, we transform how you think about learning it. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Rachel. It's Monday, which means we're here to kick off your week with insights that'll actually stick. How's your Monday treating you, Matthew?
You know what, Rachel? I woke up this morning with that familiar feeling, that mental fog, where you know you should be productive, but your brain is still negotiating with your pillow.
Oh, the Monday struggle is real. I had 3 alarms set and somehow managed to hit snooze on all of them, which is ironic because today we're diving deep into something that could have prevented exactly that situation.
Exactly. Today's topic is what I call the discipline code. But we're not talking about generic advice like just try harder or be more motivated.
Right. We're going forensic on this. We're exploring the psychology behind why intelligent people like our listeners who are ambitious enough to learn a second language, still struggle with consistency.
And here's the thing that fascinates me. Discipline isn't about willpower or determination. Those are finite resources. Real discipline is about architecture, building systems that make the right choices inevitable.
I love that framework. Because let's be honest, if learning English required constant willpower, nobody would ever become fluent. The people who succeed aren't superhuman. They've just cracked the code on making discipline automatic.
And that's what we're unpacking today. Not surface-level tips, but the deep mechanics of behavioral change, specifically applied to language learning.
Before we dive in, let me mention, if you're new here, welcome. Every episode comes with a premium study guide. You'll find it linked below. Inside, you get the full transcript, advanced vocabulary explanations, critical thinking questions, and what we call implementation protocols, specific action steps you can deploy immediately.
Yes, and here's what makes this different from other podcasts. We're targeting B1 to B2 learners. That means we're not dumbing anything down. You'll hear sophisticated vocabulary, complex sentence structures, and nuanced expressions. The kind of English that actually gets used in professional and academic environments.
All right, let's get into it. Matthew, I want to start with something controversial. I think the way most people approach discipline is fundamentally broken.
Go on. I'm intrigued.
Well, conventional wisdom says discipline is about resisting temptation, right? About saying no to distractions. But I think that's backwards. True discipline isn't about resistance. It's about elimination. It's about designing an environment where temptation doesn't even reach you.
That's a sophisticated distinction. So instead of relying on your prefrontal cortex to constantly override impulses, which is exhausting, you're essentially removing the decision entirely.
Precisely. Let me give you a concrete example from my own English learning journey. Years ago, I kept telling myself, I need to stop watching TV in Spanish and switch to English content. But every evening, I'd default back to Spanish shows because that was the path of least resistance.
Classic intention-action gap. Your conscious mind had a goal, but your environment was configured for failure.
Exactly. So instead of fighting myself every single day, I did something radical. I changed my Netflix profile language to English, deleted all my Spanish streaming apps, and set up my TV to only show English channels by default.
Brilliant. You didn't rely on discipline in the moment. You made one disciplined decision that eliminated thousands of future decisions.
And here's what happened. Within 2 weeks, watching in English wasn't even a choice anymore. It was just what I did. The discipline became embedded in the structure itself.
This connects to a concept I'm obsessed with, decision fatigue. Research shows that humans make roughly 35,000 decisions per day. Every single one of those depletes your cognitive resources.
That's staggering. So by the time evening rolls around,
you're running on empty, which is why so many people nail their morning routines but completely collapse at night. They've burned through their decision-making capacity.
So how do we apply this to English learning specifically? Because I think language learners are particularly vulnerable to this.
Absolutely. Think about it. Learning a language is inherently difficult. It requires sustained cognitive effort. If you're also forcing yourself to decide whether to study, when to study, what to study, you're setting yourself up for exhaustion.
Right. So the solution is automation.
Exactly, but not mindless automation, strategic automation. Here's my framework. Identify the 3 highest leverage English activities that'll move your needle, then build non-negotiable systems around them.
Give me an example. What would those 3 activities be?
For most intermediate learners, I'd say active listening with full attention, deliberate speaking practice with feedback, and reading complex material slightly above your current level.
Okay, so those are the what. Now, how do you systematize them?
Let's take listening. Instead of saying, I should listen to more English, which is vague and requires daily willpower, you create what I call a trigger protocol. You link the behavior to an existing habit.
Like habit stacking.
Similar, but more precise. For instance, immediately after I pour my morning coffee, before I touch my phone, I put in my earbuds and play an English podcast for exactly 15 minutes.
I notice you're very specific, not sometime in the morning, but after coffee, before phone.
That specificity is crucial. Your brain loves clarity. Vague intentions like, I'll practice more, never happen. But every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m., I'll spend 30 minutes on Zoom with my language partner becomes almost inevitable because it's concrete.
This is reminding me of implementation intentions, that psychological research about how people who specify exactly when and where they'll do something are exponentially more likely to follow through.
Exactly. The research is compelling. People who use implementation intentions are 2 to 3 times more likely to achieve their goals. And here's where it gets really interesting for language learners. We need to talk about cognitive load theory.
Oh, I love this topic. Break it down for our listeners.
Okay, so cognitive load theory essentially says your working memory, your brain's RAM, if you will, has a limited capacity. When you're learning something new, especially something as complex as a language, you're taxing that system heavily.
Right, because you're simultaneously trying to process meaning, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation.
Exactly. It's like running multiple programs on a computer with limited memory. Everything slows down. So here's the strategic insight. If your environment is chaotic, if you're constantly making micro decisions, you're wasting precious cognitive resources that should be going toward language acquisition.
So discipline in this context isn't about forcing yourself to study harder. It's about eliminating everything that's draining your mental bandwidth unnecessarily.
Beautifully said. This is why I'm militant about what I call environmental optimization. Let me give you some tactical examples.
Please do, because I think this is where theory meets practice.
All right. First, your phone. For most people, it's a discipline destroyer. You sit down to study English, your phone buzzes, you check it just for a second, and suddenly 20 minutes have evaporated.
Guilty as charged.
But here's the thing. You don't need superhuman restraint. You just need to make one decision. During English study time, phone goes in a different room, on silent, out of sight.
Physical separation, not just willpower.
Exactly. Second example, study materials. If every time you want to practice, you have to hunt for your notebook, find a pen, load up websites, you're introducing friction. That friction creates opportunity for your brain to say, maybe later.
So what's the solution?
Create what I call a launch pad. Everything you need for your English session, notebook, pens, headphones, laptop open to your learning platform, is preset and ready. You eliminate the activation energy required to begin.
That's fascinating because it flips the script. Instead of making good behaviors hard and fighting yourself, you're making them effortless.
And here's the counterintuitive part. You simultaneously want to increase friction for bad behaviors. If you waste time on social media when you should be studying, don't just rely on restraint. Delete the apps from your phone. Make it annoying to access them.
So you're essentially reverse engineering temptation.
Exactly. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something that's even more fundamental, identity-based discipline.
Ooh, this is getting philosophical. Explain what you mean.
Most people approach discipline from an outcomes-based perspective. They say, I want to be fluent in English, and then they try to force behaviors that align with that outcome. But that's fragile. As soon as motivation wanes, the behaviors stop.
Right. Because it's all external. There's no internal foundation.
Precisely. Identity-based discipline is different. Instead of focusing on what you want to achieve, you focus on who you want to become. Instead of, I want to speak fluent English, you say, I am someone who invests in their English every single day.
That's a subtle shift in language, but I imagine it has profound implications.
It does, because once something becomes part of your identity, part of how you see yourself, it stops requiring discipline in the traditional sense. You're not forcing yourself to act out of character, you're simply being consistent with who you are.
Can you give me an example of how someone would cultivate that shift?
Sure. Let's say you currently identify as someone who's trying to learn English. That identity is tentative, uncertain. It allows for inconsistency because you're still trying.
It's almost like you're giving yourself permission to fail before you even start.
Exactly. But if you shift to, I am an English learner, present tense, definitive, the psychology changes completely. English learners do certain things. They read in English daily. They seek out conversations. They embrace mistakes as data.
So every action becomes evidence that reinforces the identity.
Precisely. And here's where it gets powerful. Every time you act in accordance with that identity, even in small ways, you're casting a vote for the type of person you're becoming.
I love that metaphor. It's like democracy, but internal.
Right. You don't need to win every vote. You just need to win the majority. Miss a day of practice? That's one vote against. But if you've got dozens of votes in favor, your identity remains intact.
This is so much kinder than the all-or-nothing approach most people take.
Absolutely. And it's more realistic. Perfection isn't sustainable, but consistent, imperfect action absolutely is.
Okay, so we've covered environmental design, cognitive load management, and identity. What about the emotional component? Because I think this is where most people actually struggle.
You're absolutely right. We can design perfect systems, but if we don't address the emotional sabotage that happens in our heads, those systems will eventually collapse.
What do you mean by emotional sabotage?
Well, think about what happens when you sit down to study English after a long day. Intellectually, you know it's valuable. You know it'll benefit your future. But emotionally, you're exhausted. You crave comfort. You want the path of least resistance.
And suddenly, Netflix sounds a lot more appealing than verb conjugations.
Exactly. So here's the question. How do we work with our emotions rather than against them?
I think this requires what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to acknowledge feelings without being controlled by them.
Yes. And in practical terms, this means creating what I call emotional pre-frames. Before you begin studying, you anticipate the resistance that'll arise, and you prepare a response in advance.
Give me an example.
Sure. Let's say you know that around 8 p.m. you always feel tired and want to skip your English practice. An emotional pre-frame might sound like this. I know I'll feel tired at 8 p.m. I know my brain will offer me compelling reasons to skip tonight, but I also know that if I study for just 15 minutes, I'll feel proud and accomplished afterwards.
So you're essentially pre-experiencing both the temptation and the reward.
Exactly. You're mentally rehearsing the moment of decision so it doesn't catch you off guard. And here's the key. You're not ignoring or suppressing the emotion. You're acknowledging it. Yes, I'll feel tired, but you're not letting it dictate your behavior.
That's a mature relationship with emotions. Most people either try to override them with pure willpower, which is exhausting, or they surrender completely and let feelings make all their decisions.
Right. The middle path is acknowledgement without obedience. I feel resistant, and I'm studying anyway.
I want to touch on something related, the role of self-compassion in discipline. Because I think a lot of people are their own worst critics, and that actually undermines their consistency.
This is so important. There's this pervasive myth that discipline requires harsh self-criticism, that you need to be your own drill sergeant.
But the research shows the opposite, right?
Completely opposite. Studies on self-compassion consistently show that people who treat themselves with kindness after setbacks are more likely to persist and improve. Harsh self-criticism actually triggers shame, which makes people want to avoid the thing they feel ashamed about.
So if you miss a study session and then berate yourself, I'm so lazy, I'll never be fluent, you're actually making it less likely you'll study tomorrow.
Precisely, because now studying is associated with that painful shame. Your brain starts avoiding it as a form of self-protection.
So what's the alternative?
Self-compassion has three components: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness means treating yourself like you'd treat a good friend. If your friend missed a study session, you wouldn't say, "You're worthless." You'd say, "That's okay. Tomorrow's a new day."
What about common humanity?
That's recognizing that struggle is universal. You're not uniquely flawed because you find discipline challenging. Everyone does. It's part of being human. This reduces the isolation that comes with perceived failure.
And mindfulness?
Mindfulness means observing your experience without exaggeration. Instead of catastrophizing, "I missed one day, I'm a failure, I'll never learn English," you simply note the facts. "I didn't study yesterday. That's data. What can I learn from it?"
So you're treating setbacks as information rather than evidence of inadequacy.
Exactly. And when you do that, you maintain psychological safety, which is essential for sustained learning.
Matthew, we're running long, but I want to touch on one more thing before we wrap. The concept of strategic quitting.
Oh, this is crucial. Tell me what you mean.
So we've talked a lot about building discipline, creating systems, persisting through difficulty, but I think there's also wisdom in knowing when to quit, not because you're giving up, but because you're being strategic.
Absolutely. Not all goals deserve equal commitment. And sometimes the most disciplined choice is to abandon something that's not serving you so you can focus on what truly matters.
In the context of English learning, how might this apply?
Well, let's say you've been trying to memorize 50 new vocabulary words every day because you read somewhere that's what you should do. But it's making you miserable, you're not retaining the words, and you're starting to resent English altogether.
Right. The discipline is actually counterproductive.
Exactly. The disciplined choice might be to quit that approach and shift to something more sustainable. Maybe learning 10 words deeply, using them in conversations, seeing them in context.
So it's not about quitting English, it's about quitting a strategy that isn't working.
Precisely. And this requires honest self-assessment. You have to differentiate between "this is hard but valuable" and "this is hard and actively harmful."
How do you make that distinction?
I use a simple diagnostic. Does this challenge stretch me toward growth, or does it drain me into depletion? Growth challenges are difficult but energizing. You feel tired but satisfied afterward. Depleting challenges are difficult and exhausting. You feel resentful and diminished.
That's a useful framework. So if your English practice consistently leaves you feeling depleted rather than stretched, that's a signal to reevaluate.
Absolutely. Discipline shouldn't be synonymous with suffering. Sustainable discipline has to include joy, curiosity, and a sense of progress. Otherwise, it's just sophisticated self-punishment.
Wow, what a conversation. I feel like we've dismantled and rebuilt the entire concept of discipline today.
I hope so, because I think a lot of our listeners have been approaching this wrong, not because they lack intelligence or commitment, but because they've been given broken frameworks.
And the beautiful thing about learning English is that it's the perfect laboratory for practicing these principles, because language learning is inherently long-term. You can't cram your way to fluency. You have to show up consistently over months and years.
Which means if you crack the discipline code for English, you've essentially developed a superpower that transfers to every other area of life.
All right, before we close, let's give our listeners 3 concrete takeaways they can implement this week.
1. Design one environmental change that eliminates a decision. Maybe that's presetting your study space, or blocking distracting websites during certain hours, or putting your English practice into your calendar like a non-negotiable appointment.
2. Identify your identity. Write down one sentence, I am someone who, and complete it in relation to your English learning. Then, this week, act as if that identity is already true.
3. Practice self-compassion after failure. When, not if, but when you miss a session or make a mistake, speak to yourself with kindness. Notice the self-criticism and consciously replace it with understanding.
Perfect. And remember, friends, the goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Every episode you listen to, every small action you take, you're becoming someone different, someone more capable, more confident, more articulate.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to download the study guide below. It's got everything you need to deepen today's lesson and actually implement these strategies.
We'll be back next Monday with another thought-provoking conversation. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and remember, discipline is just love in its most strategic form.
See you next week.